You and I go out to eat. We pay premium for humane or cage-free or antibiotic-free or kosher. We expect those food to meet those standards. We don't expect that someone's getting a kosher meal somewhere and there's, bacon with my eggs, but I paid for the kosher meal and I'm happy. No, food is intimate. And that's why it's such a big lever, because people will be more passionate about that rather than those 15 to 30% will pay 3 to 10% more to do the right thing. There's a much larger group of people who insist on getting the better products.
We're all Mavericks.
Welcome to Momish Mavericks.
With your hosts, Maynard and Tobe Breslow.
We're Olim and Gayrim.
And we're also entrepreneurs and marketers.
October 7th changed everything,
including the way we do business.
This is the show that realigns your business and goals
with your values and people. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Momish Mavericks Podcast. Today, we are joined by Arlen Wasserman. Arlen is a managing director of Changing Tastes. A lot of great stuff that he's done along the way as well. He's being very humble just mentioning this. And so a lot of great stuff to talk about today. Thanks for joining us today, Arlen.
Pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. Appreciate you. Great stuff to talk about. As I mentioned, we're talking about the business of food, why food choices are the most important ones we make for the planet and ourselves, inside and out, and the evolution of corporate sustainability and sustainability in the food industry. So, you shared some of your story here before we get into it, the nuts and potatoes. Tell me a little bit about that story. Tell me about your background and what's kind of led up to Changing Tastes.
It's a long story, and we only have 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, how much time do you have exactly?
But real briefly, I started Changing Tastes 25 years ago now. I was coming out of the nonprofit environmental sector, and I had an opportunity to create the sustainability strategy for a large food company, General Mills, which was the first time anything like that had ever been done. In fact, we didn't even use the word sustainability then. I was working for the newly created Office of the Vice President of Environment. And it's been a great run. We'll get into it. But I decided to create my consulting firm on the spot because Gene Kahn, wonderful guy whose organic food company had been bought by General Mills, and he came to me and said, I know how to sell fruit. You know this health and environment stuff. How do we work together and get this done? He said, we can't hire you as a person, but we can hire a company. And you have like 5 minutes to fill out this form. So I named my company in his office. Thank you, Gene, who's up being a farmer in Anacortes, Washington now, at the national park. But, the name was not without thought because I realized there were two really important things going on. One is that what people eat is the most important thing we do on the planet, It's a third of our water use. It's 40% of our land use. It's a huge chunk of our greenhouse gas emissions. It drives deforestation, habitat, and biodiversity loss or reclamation and restoration. And so what we do has changed over time. And my mission is and was to change it for the better. So we help companies understand how tastes are changing. And then we put our thumb on the scale and try and change them for the better. We'll get into how that all happens. But that's how the company came to be. Before that, I was already focused on the environment, as I mentioned. I'd spent about a decade plus first setting up the first curbside recycling program, weekly program in the United States, and then co-founding a think tank with my friends Keith Schneider and Gary Apple up in northern Michigan, where oil and gas drilling was occurring around one of the world's largest freshwater lakes, systems of lakes. And I just was always passionate about food. And so the opportunity came to make a switch from trash to food, which I found a little more interesting when I was given a fellowship award from a philanthropy called the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I've been doing work on land use and farmland protection. I was awarded their Food and Society Fellowship more than 2 decades ago now. And that kind of let me have permission to work just on food and then get into the business side.
And, I know you glossed over so much there, shared a lot with me as well beforehand, and as you mentioned, you were doing sustainability before it was a thing, before it was a buzzword. everything like that. And I think no matter how you cut it, I think sustainability is an important imperative in life in general at all times, right? I mean, if a person's overworking themselves and it's not sustainable, then what are we going to do in the long term? And I think it's become something that's very much politicized, right? Where it's almost like divisive, just that very term, like what's wrong with sustainability? You know, when people start talking, well, implying that the global warming, global change, global climate change, and then people their heads start spinning. And when it seems like when you were starting, it was very much like this was like counterculture. You were like a visionary in this sense, going against kind of the machine, so to speak. And now it's a place where, it seems like some companies really care about it, and some companies have kind of turned it into like a marketing technique. Like, hey, we're sustainable. Yes, get off our back, kind of stuff like that. Where do you stand on that? Where do you see on that? And you've kind of pioneered this, right? So you didn't do it because marketing technique. You do this because you actually care about the environment and what we're doing to it, right?
There's a lot packed in there, Maynard. So I'll start with, the news that I'm pretty disappointed in what most companies do today.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you call it greenwashing or whatever, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But the profession of sustainability, which didn't exist when I got started, has turned a lot into record keeping and scorekeeping, right? You measure your carbon footprint, you measure how much water you're using, you measure your waste, you put out colorful reports, you go to a lot of meetings, and you set some ambitious goals, like we're going to be zero carbon or carbon neutral in 15 years, or we're going to half our waste in 10 years. But when you fall behind the curve you need to stay on, there's no consequence. There's no doubling down on the investments and the effort. In fact, the thing that I see that's worst is that companies change their goals. As you and I both know, in the Jewish tradition, there's this notion of chet during Yom Kippur, which is, the archer pulls back the arrow, lets it fly, and, he was going for his target, but he hits someone in the stands or kills a donkey or whatever.
Missed the mark,
so you move the target over. You move the target to where the arrow landed. Is kind of what happens a little too much. But that doesn't mean this isn't really important. And as most of your listeners and viewers probably know, here in the U.S. where I am, we had an election a few months ago, and the government's probably going to do less about these somewhat existential concerns for our planet. Los Angeles is finally burning out right now from a few weeks of fire as we're recording this. Climate change is having a real impact. We know in Israel, there's other emergency or urgent issues, but there's also a lot of extreme heat and fire happening. Israel leads in fire suppression technology because got to. But that said, turning back the calendar, I've been doing this when it wasn't even an issue. Before I went to college, I spent a year in Israel. I was spent for a few months in Kibbutz Keturah, and we went up Mount Keturah. I was probably 17 years old. And Yuval, forget Yuval's last name, he was the wise elder. Maybe he was 40, which doesn't seem so old these days.
Every Yuval I know is the wise elder for some reason,
Yeah. So Yuval said, look around.
It's something that you adopt the name later on in life, I guess.
Yeah. The story gets more polished because I've told it for so many years, but he said, maybe this eloquently, maybe not, and I pieced it together later. If you look around this small area, this used to be a fertile land. We overgrazed for 5,000 years. Now it's a desert, and water resources are scarce. And one of the reasons we don't have a two-state solution is because if, this was long before October 7th. This was way, way back in the 1980s. He said, poorly industrialized Gaza would mean no drinking water for Israel. And I came back to the U.S. with that in mind, and got my degree in natural resources, was really interested in how industrialization or business affects the environment. And at the University of Michigan, in I think it was 1990, I asked if I could take, as a graduate student in the School of Natural Resources, if I could take a class in the business school. No one had ever done that before. Not at the University of Michigan. And from what the deans who were meeting about this, extraordinary request, couldn't find other colleges that were doing it either. And so I and my research partner, Chris Olson, who kind of said, sure, I'll go with you so you're not alone, became the first two students to go into the University of Michigan Business School, which was then like the top business school in the country, or maybe number two. And my professor said, there's no way you're passing this class. Business students are different. I got a B plus. I think she was a little surprised. And that kind of sent me on my way. Really focused on business and the environment. One of my research assistants led a program called the Center for Environment and Business, or ERB, at the University of Michigan for 13 years. They created a joint graduate school program around my idea that someone should be in the School of the Environment and the School of Business at the same time. And then I was one of the first chief sustainability officers, the first one actually for a company called Sodexo, which then was the world's second largest restaurant company after McDonald's. And, was pioneering what this is all about. People until then thought, it was a choice between being good for the environment or making money. We looked at both efficiency, but also how do we innovate new things? And we've created both there and then in Changing Tastes about $3 billion worth of additional revenue for our clients each year. So doing the right thing for the planet makes you a different company. And I've had, good instincts about what that is. But right now, everyone knows that they have to say they're doing well for the planet. And I think the profession has become one of bean counters far too often, and not people who are given permission to push from within or like as a consultant from without to make real change.
And, I think a lot of stuff there as well. I tried so much to, on this show, just kind of like stay away from like politics and these kind of things a little bit because they become such a divisive issue. Right. And it's like you got half of the audience who's like, yeah, rah, rah. And the other half is like, la, 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 la. Don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that speaks volumes about our society in today's day and age that kind of probably wasn't there before, not to the extreme degree that it is now. But I think sustainability, as I mentioned, just taking out, global climate change and just talking about sustainability, I think there's a much needed rebranding that needs to take place. As I mentioned, I was in the cannabis industry for many years, and they went from being weed and pot and the war on drugs and drugs are bad to cannabis, and the cannabis industry and these kind of things, and it's kind of turned into a bipartisan issue, right? Where both sides have kind of gone on board to varying degrees, right? But you see a lot of less about that. And I heard once as well that, there's been no better rebrand than mayonnaise into aioli. It's like put a little garlic in there and call it aioli. And wow, everybody loves aioli, but mayonnaise on, right? And I think, do you think that sustainability needs a rebrand like that in order to be kind of like, to leave that kind of baggage? And like I said, sustainability is something that we all need in every aspect of our life. There's nothing that we can do that's not sustainable and not have extreme consequences for it. That's the bottom line, and then we can get into the other stuff and, politics. And then that's when people start shutting off. But just that one thing about sustainability, how important that is that something that you think is even necessary, or does it have to be tied into kind of like, it's like people, of course, it's like kind of tune out when they hear it and there's, if we don't do this, we're going to be gone by 2010. It's like, well, that didn't happen. And it just kind of gets pushed out like that. And it's like, listen, it doesn't matter when it's going to happen or what's going to happen. The fact of the matter is we can't just keep dumping all of our trash in the ocean, right? The fact of the matter is that we can't just keep having industries like meat industries. And I love meat, right? But I think about where my meat comes from and how it is and all that stuff, right? And we can't just keep doing it in this kind of reckless way and not have consequences regardless of what we think is actually going on underneath the surface or how close we are, anything like that. Do you think that that's like a viable option, or has it just kind of become so intertwined together that you have just like half of the population just tuning out immediately when you hear the name sustainability? Or is there another word that we could use that's not going to garner that response?
So lots there to unpack. And of course, I'm going to take it from the lens of food and immediately challenge you because, the best guests fight with the host.
Good.
The cannabis industry is not the best rebrand. Have you heard of Chilean sea bass?
Chilean sea bass. I have, of course.
It's selling a lot better now that it's not Patagonian toothfish.
Yeah, same thing.
Have you ever eaten a kiwi?
I love kiwi.
They're no longer New Zealand gooseberries. So there's some powerful rebrands out there.
Yeah, definitely,
Trust me. And I don't love the sustainability label, right? Like you were talking earlier about, if I'm living a bad lifestyle, if I'm not healthy, I can't keep going.
Yeah.
And sustainability literally means keep going the way we are, not decline. And, again, going back to Jewish roots, we're here to do tikkun olam, to reweave the fabric of life, not to just, make sure it doesn't fray worse. We're supposed to make the world a little bit better. And sustainability does not capture that. We do a lot of work with people to try and understand what do they mean to build our case for companies to do better. And when you talk to a food shopper about sustainability, it is things like recycling, or maybe it's climate change, but to businesses. But for food only, it's very personal, right? What I eat goes in my body. So those microplastics or those antibiotics or the pain the animals felt when they could have had better lives, that goes into us, and a lot of people want it to be better. The big companies are thinking about, boy, I should reduce my plastic waste, and people are thinking about the food that I eat better be good for me and good for the planet. And there's some disconnect there that we've helped bring back together so companies are motivated to really improve what they do. The other thing is that food is exceptionally personal, right? So you and I and most people know about green energy, right? You pay a little bit more for wind power or solar power or clean energy. But the reality is that the electrons that windmill or that solar array is producing may not be the electrons that come into my house. They're going into the grid. I'm paying for a lower footprint for power generation, but no one's tracking those electrons. You and I go out to eat. We pay premium for humane or cage-free or antibiotic-free or kosher. We expect the food to meet those standards. We don't expect that someone's getting a kosher meal somewhere and there's, bacon with my eggs, but I paid for the kosher meal and I'm happy. No, food is intimate. And that's why it's such a big lever, because people will be more passionate about that rather than those 15 to 30% will pay 3 to 10% more to do the right thing. There's a much larger group of people who insist on getting the better products. For the rebrand of sustainability, they don't think of it as sustainability. They think about it: better food, ethical food, good food, the right thing to eat, the right thing to do. And I don't know that there's a great word there. For a little while over the last 2 or 3 years, the food industry's been, enamored with regenerative, which means nothing. Before that, it was natural. Before that, it was sustainable. But you've just got to ask yourself, is my business contributing to a better world beyond the money I put in the pockets of my workers and my shareholders? And by just doing what my product does, like every food company can say, we're making a better world because we're putting calories in people's stomachs. And if it weren't for us, maybe there wouldn't be calories. Probably their competitors would just sell more, but we don't go there. But are we doing something like restoring habitat, reducing water use, restoring water quality, et cetera, et cetera? And those are the things that companies really need to do. I think right now you just got to tell an honest story. The challenge is, segue into whatever our next questions is, as you pointed out, those stories aren't always honest or really accurate or meaningful. And I can go on about that, but I'll give you a chance to talk.
Yeah, no, I think that you mentioned, obviously, how intimate food is. And, I think we kind of take for granted, like, this concept of the business of food, right? It's like everybody eats, right? This is like the first thing that, mom and pop can do is open up a restaurant, that focuses on maybe the food that they grew up with or that they brought with them, they immigrated or anything like this. This is like the first thing that people kind of do, right? And it's just kind of self-apparent why it is going to be successful or why it should be successful. Everybody needs to eat, right? So how do we really talk about the business of food in a sophisticated manner, right? And understanding that beyond, I think that's kind of when we talk about the business of food, what I think about a lot is like the algorithms, the formulas where we can maximize profits and minimize maybe even health benefits or anything like that. Not just not on purpose, perhaps, maybe, I'm not sure, But just as like, oh well, I mean, no one's gonna miss it anyways. They're gonna be full by the end. They won't notice until later that it didn't really help them or anybody else, right? So talking about actually the business of food in that manner, in a way that is both sophisticated and doesn't dehumanize us.
There's a whole lot there. So I'm of two minds. I do work with some of the world's bigger food companies, and they are, by necessity, running factories which are run by engineers. And, the cognate for engineers, food scientists and food technicians, and maybe nutrition scientists. And to them, electrons are electrons, nutrients are nutrients, whatever. It makes sense in the lab, it makes sense on the spreadsheet, but like you said, it's not great for us. And one of the things that I wish was better was, you mentioned, how much meat do we eat, or maybe we got to eat less meat, is a bunch of manufactured plant-based meat analogs have come out on the market. And we can talk about, how they taste and why their sales aren't up. But no one went and said, 30 to 40% of the population may have trouble digesting protein isolates from soy and pea, especially soy. And they're going to not feel good after they eat that a couple times in a row. And, we don't know why that exactly is, but some people get upset tummies. And, that isn't just about what we eat, but also the cure. So I was just doing some work with some industry folks on GLP-1, those drugs that people can take to lose weight quickly. And one of the things that isn't talked about in all the headlines is that about 60% of the people who have insurance coverage for GLP-1 and get the prescriptions have stopped using them within, I think it's 4 or 6 months. Yeah. Why? Because as good as they're supposed to be for weight loss, they make you depressed. They give you, well, let's say you're running but not for exercise. They give you way bad digestive upset in a fair number of people. And so there's all of these engineered solutions that just don't work with our bodies in real life.
Yeah.
And there's another business of food, and I really favor the restaurant industry, and I try and work with ingredient producers, which is to give us real food, cooked in interesting ways or packaged in more convenient ways, but not heavily doctored up. And I think that's where we need to go. It's really challenging in an era of climate change and drought, because what's available is not as predictable as it used to be. And that coming up against people cooking less than ever means we don't have the knowledge to deal with the fact that here where I am on the east coast of Philadelphia, we're having the coldest winter in 5 years. So for all of us farmers market hipsters, there ain't no kale. What are we going to do?
I got some in my garden over here if you want some of that.
Well, I know I have a lot of things I can do with cabbage. Not everyone wants to buy a head of cabbage. But we got to learn to cook again, given that the world is going to require us to be smarter about what we choose to eat. That's another piece, too, which is, in Israel, an affluent country, in the U.S., a very affluent country, if something's not growing well, we pay a little bit more, and then we take it away from people who it's, a cultural norm. You can go back and do the history, a lot of people think Arab Spring was about political unrest. It was also about skyrocketing wheat prices and the government not doing anything about it in Egypt because no one knew what else to cook and everyone needed bread. It's part of the culture.
Yeah, and, I think you make a couple of good points in things that I haven't thought about. I mean, of course, that's why I have you on, to have me think about things I never thought about. But it's so interesting, right, where, corporate America and goes and says, how can we, get bigger chickens? How can we maximize profits? How can we do this and that? And we're going to do a lot of unnatural things in order to get a higher yield and a higher return and get a bigger ROI, right? And then so sustainability comes in, or people who want to fight this, combat this, they say, I got it. We're going to also create unnatural things to combat what corporations are doing. And we're going to also be corporate and use the buzzwords and everything like that. That's secondary. But the first thing is that so many companies are just doing the same thing or even worse, right? Like, I got a solution, right? It's fine thinking, right? But we're going to create a Colombian sea bass in a vat. And we are going to generate them in a vat over here in Israel. And we're going to just have this fake meat that came out of nowhere, 3D printed meat, so to speak. And this is going to be good for us. And as we see, right, there's a lot of buzz, and then it goes away. And what you said, I think, hits the nail on the head, obviously, is that we're not cooking enough. We're not depending on our local sources enough. We're not depending, and it's not just like, farmers market, and that's great. It's totally great. Right. But what about, people, lived in Mexico. My uncle was a butcher. He had a farm, a ranch, and he'd go in there, and non-Jewish guy, right, and take care of the cow and go into the city and sell the cow. And like, that was it, and then the cow's done and he goes home. And this was like his business, and we want to do everything, but just kind of like get back to basics. And I can't help but think that it's totally by design that, we are being trained to be dependent on others that are going to take care of us, as opposed to owning self-responsibility. And of course, that comes along with, that not all of us have the same bootstraps, I guess, same size bootstraps. But we definitely can all kind of share in our own, me personally, forget about all. I can personally make kale, grow kale, and, I want to be a shochet and have my own kind of ranch and have that stuff. And just for myself and for people around me who are interested in that as well, who want to buy my meat, right? And these are like actual changes that they can be sustainable, right? And I think it goes back to education. We look at the education level of Americans across the board, and it's just down, right? And the attention span is just, we already know what it is. And so these are, I think, the major concerns. It's like people can't even remember what you said 3 minutes ago, let alone remembering about sustainability and why it should be important. And at the same time, having somebody to trust, even though this person who says that they're going to be sustainable, they are doing backwards things as well, or kind of quote unquote unnatural things that are, as you mentioned, aren't sitting well with our bodies. And just getting back to, not that we have to go back to living on farms, but just increasing that. And if we invest in that kind of stuff, as opposed to the gigantic farms and, people buying up huge things of land and having these mega processing centers, I think that would bring back a lot there in that regard. So
I'm not saying we all got to go back to the land. There's a few things that are going on. One is that people or places that are well suited to grow something ought to grow it. Again, I know we're talking mostly to an American audience, but you're sitting in Israel. Kibbutz system is that in microcosm, right? My kibbutz did dates and pomelos. Yodvata down the road did the best chocolate pudding.
My wife was at that one.
It's okay to crank out stuff you're good at. The question is it okay to build a regional business that satisfies the culturally appropriate food needs of your country or your region of several countries, as compared to, does your idea have to be $100 billion idea? And in the US, as well as other countries, there's a lot about food that you cannot patent or copyright. Recipes, farming methods, seeds that you find or species that you find in nature. And so the fast money that came out of tech and knows the world has a food problem has shifted the new idea factories, the innovators, into either doing something that's high-tech, synthesized foods, or genetically modified foods, or equipment-based, not natural system-based, so that there's intellectual property you can own, license, or resell to a big company. The other thing is our food system is enormous. Right now, more than 1 out of every 7 adults earns their livelihood by selling food and working in the food industry. Over time, economics, those things get centralized and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's really hard to think about building an alternative to infrastructure that evolved over millennia. Who knows what the investment is? So it's a rather narrow window to play in to make things better. And one of the things is attitudinal, right? So with something like climate change or water scarcity as really big issues, if you're not going to engineer your way out of it, and you're going to build a business that maybe just serves America or just serves Middle East and North Africa with conventional growing methods and foods that people expect, it's not a $100 billion idea. It may feed people, it may restore nature, it may employ thousands or tens of thousands of people, but it won't be the next Apple computer or Google. And so it's harder to find the money because people want to invest in tech right now. Flip side is, for all those brilliant engineers who know that food, we're not moving to a post-food economy. We can move to a post, combustion engine economy, but not a post-food economy, is they are bringing the skills that they have to the challenge. And I just think that there's a little more culture and a little more humbleness involved in food than, say, in software engineering.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing missing, as you mentioned, humility across the board. In business, it's unfortunate, right, where, as you mentioned, the greed, right? I think capitalism, everybody now is, so many people talking about capitalism, how horrible it is, and it's just sociopaths, right? So the more that you want to go for it and don't care, then the more you can make, right? But it's not that inherently capitalism is the problem. It's that living a life without values and morals that kind of lead us and allow us to have a compass as we make our decisions, right? The need to be the $100 billion company as opposed to the $12 million company that's doing well regionally, and that's nothing to scoff at. And people are doing well. So I guess what kind of, you mentioned earlier Tikkun Olam, you mentioned obviously, other concepts in our faith, and it's not necessarily a religious question or a faith question, more of like, what other kind of values kind of are your compass as you lead here, helping others in sustainability in the business of food?
I think about a few things there. One is we are the determiners of biodiversity. And I work really hard to have some of the world's top nutritionists not recommend the next superfood. So in America, we fell in love with avocados. February 9 is Super Bowl Sunday. We'll eat a huge number of avocados. Also a comment on the influence of Hispanic culinary traditions on America. We love them so much that we're the leading cause of deforestation in Western Mexico.
And it's run by the cartels, by the way, as well, right?
Well, there's that in part. We also fell in love with pomegranates and cleared tens of thousands of acres in California to plant pomegranates. We need to think about eating a mix of food because the planet provides us a mix of food. So that's one thing. The other thing is we do need to eat less meat. The conventional livestock industry is a huge of greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, the market for GMO corn and soy, mining groundwater in the Corn Belt in the U.S., and on and on and on. But that doesn't mean that animals are evil or that meat, which used to be a part of our diet forever, has no role. It just means that even though we figured out how during this window of time over a few decades to produce more meat than ever, doesn't mean we should eat more meat than ever. That's it. Put it back in its place on the table. Whether it's a Jewish tradition where, meat was every 2 or 3 Shabbat kind of thing. You'd have a brisket, or you take the scraps, you make cholent. Or whether that's another tradition where meat is more like a flavoring and a texture, and it's 10% of the recipe or 10% of your meal, not 60% of your meal, with 3 green beans and a potato on the side. And the last one is that I think about is we have a better chance of getting this right by changing what we eat, changing tastes, than we do engineering. You might be able to make a better cow. You might be able to reduce its emissions, its digestive emissions, but you're probably not going to jump what's called a trophic level, remember the food chain, and make a cow better for the planet than, say, the soybeans it eats or a head of lettuce. And that's actually the thing you mentioned, cellular meat. One of the challenges with that is, although it's pretty cool sounding, is those cells need to digest carbohydrates, the fuel for growth, and get amino acids, the building blocks for life. And right now the math does not look good for digesting carbohydrates in a reactor more efficiently than it happens, say, in a field with photosynthesis or inside the belly of a cow or a chicken or a pig. Because as smart as engineers are, they haven't caught up with, millions of years of evolution, or if you're really religious, God's word. So we need to realize there's a limit to our genius, and we've got to do a better job of working with the planet, which right now provides enough calories for everyone and then some, and enough protein for everyone and then some. It just might not look like what we'd like with our, 4 patties on the hamburger.
Yeah, and I think 4 pennies on the hamburger, all these things, once again, goes back to a disconnect that we have. I think we talk about, what is God's will, or, whatever else. I think part of it is the middle ground, right? And this seems to be, this comes up in my life. I think sustainability is the middle road, right? Being too extreme on one side or the other is inherently carries with the problems, as we're seeing in this battle that's going on of like, no this, no that, no this, no that. Nothing is going wrong with the environment. Everything is going wrong. It's going to collapse tomorrow if we don't do something about it.
Yeah.
And all these kind of things, instead of like, it's like the person who wants to lose weight because they have an event coming up. They got to lose weight for their whatever, their wedding or their high school reunion or something else going on. And so they're just like cramming in as much unsustainability as possible, right? Where they're just like not eating enough calories and not feeling good about themselves and working out all the time. And then the second that time passes, it's just like, and they just yo-yoing and going back and forth. And this is kind of the thing as well, where we have so much disconnect on actual meat. If we're talking about meat specifically, right? I'm grateful that I have this accessible, right? I'm here in Israel, and I go to a place that serves only chaybari, stuff that it was mooing yesterday. They come and they bring it in, and it's like Gan Eden. It's like, this is sustainable if we can keep that up according to our taste and according to changing taste. I love how you tie that in and everything. But like you said, I think just the amount, and people don't want to know where their meat comes from, and they just want to zone out. And this is something that I'm actually so attracted to, like I said, being a showhead and being there. And I've been at events where there's a shechting going on, and I've actually helped in the whole thing and everything. And I find that to be, and funny enough, at one of the events, half of the people there, more than half of the people I would say, were actually either vegan or past vegans. And they wanted to come and see what this was, what this looked like. And some people were totally cool, and some people were having a really tough time. Right, because just any life for them is a tragedy. So, but the people that don't believe that think about more sustainability way, they're like, wow, if people actually did this kind of thing or knew where it's coming from, and we'd have much less desire to have so much. Right, when you live with gratitude and you're kind of aware. We don't need so much. When a person's just trying to cram everything in and they don't even think about what the methods are, and they just, for its own sake, then that's where we've been running into issues. So much stuff to cover here. I know, you got to run. So if you want to respond to that, you're more than welcome, and then we'll move on to...
Now, we'll close with faith. Here we are at Mamash Mavericks. The gratitude we share, the gratitude prayer Jews say every morning, that's really important stuff. Yeah. And it's important stuff because our minds, with that last thing, need to overcome evolution. It's within the last couple generations that we have too much abundance around us. My father, may always be remembered, grew up when there wasn't enough. And for, millennia, our bodies have evolved to eat whatever is around while it's there, because we don't know what's coming tomorrow. Now, we don't know what's coming tomorrow because of climate change, but we do know there's plenty of fast food and processed food. And, genetically, we're programmed to keep on eating today because we don't know what's coming tomorrow. So things like gratitude, the Jewish religion, a real appreciation that we live in a very special and different time. Yeah. Our minds have to help us get over our programming for overconsumption, and that's a big part of what we do. A lot of people are now treating 2025 as the buy nothing or buy nothing I don't need year, and it's going to be really interesting to see if that catches on, along with the just eat when I need year.
Yeah, one person at a time. I think every single person, we all have our own responsibility, right? Just like my kids, I can't have someone else raise my kids and then be upset when they didn't get, raised the way that I want them to be or whatever else it is. And that would be just silly, right? So the same kind of thing where it's just everybody wants someone else to not only foot the bill, right? You mentioned how much abundance we have, how much shefa we have, and this is, it's a good thing, right? But it's good when we have the proper vessels to receive them and to hold them and utilize them in the proper way. Otherwise, it just, it's like pouring good wine on the floor. What good does that do? So amazing stuff, I guess. Before we wrap up, let our listeners know where they can find out more about changing taste. Seek out your services, reach out to you, and get the lowdown and the roadmap from somebody who's been doing it before it was a thing.
So, you're welcome to reach us at www.changingtastes.com or follow Arlen Wasserman on LinkedIn because I'm as opinionated every day there as I am here. And thank you so much for including me, Maynard.
Yeah. And before I let you go, I have to ask a bit before they go, being your journey and entrepreneurship and everything, what is your definition of success, whether it be personally, professionally, spiritually, or anything else? What does success look like for you?
Right now, part of it is I want to give what I've learned over 30, 40 years of doing this back and try and, have the changes that happen on our planet happen faster than the next generation taking over. And the other is I want to feel like I've done something good for the world, that I've helped, and that I've enjoyed helping every day that I work and every day that I'm around. I'm fortunate that my love of food became my career, and I'm not working in trash anymore, so I got to be grateful for that. And that's what does it for me.
That's great. You could be in sustainability and trash, but you're in food. And that
Yes.
is great, and helping other people as well with that. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. Everybody else, wherever you are, make sure you check out Changing Tastes. The links, wherever you will be here, wherever you're listening. So check that out and give Arlen a shout. And appreciate all of you. And Arlen, appreciate you once again for coming on. Fantastic. A lot to think about. And we could stay here forever. And there's so much more to go over. So I hope, I know I got a lot of it. I hope everybody else got a lot of it as well. And once again, I appreciate you. To see actually sustainability being expressed in the world with people having that responsibility and doing what they need to do, and every single person having a chain reaction, one by one, a domino effect, and not just for themselves but also inspiring others. That you should be able to see that in our time and see the fruit of your work definitely over the last many decades that you've been working on this. So, Chaim.